Have you ever completed a huge project?
Wow!
Only to later discover that your entire process was flawed? That's what happens to us in this episode. Join us as we make a few mistakes. So what have we got going on here?
I'm trying to make a lamination jig for our new deck beams.
Our new deck beams. That's a phrase I'm going to have to get used to. Ever since realizing just how far gone most of our deck beams are, we've had to resign ourselves to a big new chapter in this refit, the replacement of the deck beams. And the first step is to make a jig. No, not the Irish kind, unfortunately. A jig is a curved mold, if you will. The curve of our jig has to exactly match the curve of our deck beams. Our deck beams are going to be made out of 4 layers of cedar, glued together with epoxy. The process is to glue the layers together, then clamp them all down on the jig so that they dry with the correct arc. Then, voila, a curved deck beam is born. But now, the tricky part is in measuring the exact curvature of the existing deck beams so that we can make an accurate jig.
So these beams, they actually look pretty straight, but they're not. They have a very slight curvature to them. I keep referring to it as crown. On some boats, the curvature changes as the width of the boat changes, or yeah, it just doesn't have to be the same curvature everywhere. But it is, to my eye at least, very consistent in the Cape George boats. There's the same curvature in the cockpit, on the side decks, and over the bow. So the first step is figuring out how much that curvature is. So how did I figure that out? Well, one initial simple method was measuring. So to measure, well, I have 2 rulers.
Yeah.
And this one is about the length of a beam, so that's perfect because then I can have the edges kind of sit here, and then I peek over the top because there should be a hollow if the beam is curved, and then with this one I measure, and this is actually very accurate. It goes down to 64ths of an inch. 60 muff. So here we go. Well, this is not the best example as the trim is interfering here slightly, but you get the idea. And then I hold this one up here and it measures a teeny weeny something of a little bit.
Well, at least we know this is going to be accurate.
What's that? After this, I proceeded to kind of get confirmation, and I did 2 additional things. And now the first one was string a line, but I did so where I have a full beam. So why don't we go up there and I can show you what I mean. So here's our beam that goes from side to side, and you can perfectly see the curvature to the beam. So now I've attached a string, and now I can go to the middle where the arc is the highest, and I measured again here, and I came to discover that it is 1.5 inches on a 8-foot arc width.
Okay. And I mean, technically you should be measuring right in the middle, right? But
yeah.
Oh, did you measure that exactly?
Yeah, totally. Well,
okay.
It is centered. Again, another thing that you can do then to reconfirm it is split this 8-foot section into 2-foot sections, which are equal to the other beams, and I did so by just holding up the string. Now this would be a 4-foot section from 0 to 0 arc width, and then I can measure here in the middle. Or I can divide it once further by holding it just here, and then I have again only a 2-foot section, which are the short beams, and then if I measure the little gap that I have here, I have the height within, well, whatever arc width.
Right, because that height should be the same as the one you just measured out in the saloon.
Exactly.
And it is, right?
And it is.
It is a something of a something.
It is, yeah, of a 64th. No, it is roughly 2 to 3 30 seconds. Okay. So it's tiny. I also took a sheet of paper. I tried to do some math, and I tried to get inspired by Michelangelo. But it didn't work. But what helped me was a website that I found along the way. It confirmed these numbers, so that's pretty cool. So the website that I found, you can put in 2 numbers, 2 variables, and you get a third. The 2 numbers that I had were the arc width and the height. That is 8 feet and 1.5 inches, or 2 feet and 2 to 3 30 seconds. And the third variable that it spits out is the radius. Pretty much those numbers that I was able to read off this tiny thing confirmed the same radius. A radius of, 768 inches and 3/4. So pretty huge radius. But the very, very handy thing of this website is that then you can divide this, whatever section you want, you can divide it into 1-inch increments or 5, and I chose 6. And it shows you from the bottom line going up towards the curvature how big the distance is at a 6-inch interval. So then then it was pretty easy to me to draw a line and measure and then draw an arc on the table.
Okay, so let me recap what's happened. Aladino measured our deck beams using rulers and a string. He determined the height of the crown and the width of the arc. With those 2 numbers, he could then figure out the radius of our deck beams using a calculator on this website. Fortunately, the radius for the shorter beams in the saloon turns out to be the same as for the longer beams up forward, which is good news for us as it means that all our deck beams have the same curvature. But how does a radius help us? Well, with a radius, you can find the circumference. And an arc is basically just a chunk of a circumference. So say we need to make a 6-foot beam. This is where that website comes in handy again. You can type in that you need a 6-foot beam, and then the website will use the circumference of the overall circle, basically just remove a 6-foot chunk, and then it will analyze that chunk to tell you how high your crown has to be. The website can also tell you the height of the arc at any interval you need, not just at the crown. So say you want to know the height of the arc at every 6 inches of your 6-foot beam. The website can do that for you. So that's what we did. We wanted to make an 8-foot jig, since that's the longest beam we'll have to make. And we wanted measurements at every 6-inch interval just to make sure we were drawing the curve right. Once we had those measurements, we could mark it all on a piece of plywood and then cut it out to make our jig.
Yeah, 50, so this should do. because now running the router here, we should come close to 0 here in the middle. Here's the middle. Here. That looks pretty good to me.
Okay.
And then we have exactly the same curvature.
To make the jig, we needed 2 pieces of plywood with the exact same curve. So Aladino cut a second piece with a router, using the first piece as a guide. Wow!
Morning.
Aladino!
What?
Holy crap!
It's just a test piece. We don't even know if it works yet. But yeah,
But it looks mighty impressive.
it looks pretty sweet, doesn't it?
Well, you were out here until about 1 a.m. last night,
Yeah, I couldn't stop.
and I went to bed because I was like, this is enough of this.
Yeah.
So this is the first I'm seeing of this. Just overnight, Aladino had made a beautiful looking jig. But like late night projects are often bound to do, this one hadn't turned out perfectly. There was one big flaw in his construction method, although neither of us had realized it just yet. As Aladino explains his process in making this jig, try to see if you can figure out what the flaw is.
So just to recap about the construction, because I didn't have a game plan when I started it. I had an idea and it developed as I went. My idea was I take the hole saw, I cut holes into the plywood so that I can use the clamps, but the clamp always needs to be supported about at the same level of where you actually clamp it down on top. So as you can see, this does not work properly. This would only make the wood slide. So because of that, I added this 2x6 so that I have 1/2 inch or 3/8 visible, and it is a support, it is a shelf for the clamp to be in the middle of the jig, like so, and then the pressure can be applied right in the middle. And the very final touch was cutting some lumber into these little strips here, and then I've just glued them on top as a base for every kind of wood that I would have on top.
So you may be shouting at the screen already if you've noticed what the big design flaw in our jig is. But in case you haven't spotted it yet, like us, let me fill you in. So Aladino measured the curve of our deck beams, and then transferred that exact curve to the plywood which he used to build the sides of the jig. Then he placed wooden spacers on top of the plywood sides. Since neither of us are particularly fond of or good at math, we didn't think twice about adding these spacers. They were all exactly the same size as each other, so we figured they wouldn't change the arc. They're just creating a parallel arc. Well, we were wrong. That's not how arcs work. And by adding these spacers, we actually changed the arc entirely.
I mean, if you really think about it, it makes perfect sense. As the radius becomes bigger, it's not the same arc anymore. But I don't know, my stubborn brain just looking at it was like, well, look at it, it's so parallel, it's got to be the same. So I just drew out 2 different radiuses here, and then I made a little plastic thingy. Let's say we are using the small radius right now. So I place this one exactly over the small radius. And now moving it up parallel to the upper one, it reveals not a parallel gap anymore.
Yeah, it's a very different arc.
And the same thing instead, if I place the plastic on the big one and I move it down to the smaller one, then you can see, not quite curvy enough.
Mm-hmm.
We have accepted and realized our mistake.
Yes.
But I think we're on to something good now with the new jig.
But instead of completely rebuilding our jig, we decided to just make it work by reshaping the spacers. Aladino planed some down and added wood to others, all the while checking it against the original curvature. It was kind of an anticlimactic finish, but in the end, we did have a jig with the right curvature to make some new deck beams, and that was the important part.
Basically, in the end, I didn't want to do any more math and anything with numbers, so I just relied on an existing beam. This is one that I took out, and I used this one to get the arc that I needed. And I mean, of course, it was also some measuring, know how much I was wrong in the first place, so I had to raise it here and lower it at the ends to get a smaller radius, more curvature, and this original beam touches everywhere and slides along really nicely.
And you did make another test beam, right?
Yeah. And one thing that I can say about that one is, well, I made it to be 8 feet too, but since I haven't opened up the decks yet to check if this is correct, and we learned I cannot set it on top of the decks to see if it's accurate because it will be different. So therefore I have cut a short beam out of this long one. I walked into the boat with this short beam, and I could double check everywhere if it fits and how similar it is to the original beams. And there is slight variances. Some are a little taller, some are a little shorter, but they all are within 99% of this arc. This seems to do really, really nicely.
Awesome.
Yeah.
The journey wasn't perfect, but we had made it. Hey Aladino,
Hey,
we got a delivery today, didn't we?
indeed.
You want to talk about it?
Well, too bad we didn't film it, but I was almost in underpants still. Well, I was in bed when it knocked on the door. I thought they would arrive later.
Yeah,
in
they
the
came
day.
at like 8:30 and we're not really early people.
Yeah, so there was the truck from Edensaw. Our wood was being delivered.
We had ordered some Alaska yellow cedar to make our new deck beams and it had just arrived. Now, there was truly nothing between us and this next huge chapter of the refit.
Yeah, it's very nice wood, very straight grain, no knots or one or two. So next thing will be getting to smaller sizes. We'll use a friend's cabinet saw for that, I think.
Yay!
Now also we got some plywood.
Yeah. So this is for the deck beams.
Exactly. Deck beams, floor timbers, stuff like that.
And then the plywood, you want to show that?
And the plywood. So excited about this. I mean, this is the most basic of boat building plywoods to me. Okume plywood. It's still, talking of mahogany plywoods, it's a subspecies of mahogany. It's not actually mahogany. But everybody refers to it still as mahogany. Mahogany?
Mahogany. Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know, but I'm doing a mix between English and German. Otherwise, it would be mahagoni. Mm-hmm. That's in German.
But also, wait, can you film me for a second? Okay, it literally makes me mad when people get all upset about Aladino's pronunciations. English is Aladino's 5th language. So you can all learn 5 languages and then you can get mad at his pronunciations. But like, 5th language, people.
Okay, what I can work on though is word flow and getting nice sentences.
No, your sentences are amazing. I mean, I speak 1.5 languages, and in my half language, it's pretty terrible.
Eloquently so. Anyway, so yeah, this should be pretty simple stuff. It's okume plywood. It is not a real mahogany. It's mahogany.
Yeah, don't even worry about it.
It's a subspecies, but still, it is very good for boat building, and it is the lightest of the mahogany subspecies. There is sapelli, Meranti, well, then there's the very luxurious Kaya, which is less used in plywood. It's more just a solid wood. I really like working with this stuff. This is glued to Lloyd specifications, which is for boat building. So there is no voids in the face. There is no voids inside. It is glued with boil and waterproof glue. Those are all pretty critical things for boat building plywood. And I just like how uniform the grain is, so it makes it nice to work with. Instead, the Douglas fir that I've been seeing, it seems like every layer works against the other, and they're very different, because you have those very pronounced rings, and it warps more, and this is more like a uniform thing. I really like this.
And it does come at a cost.
It does come at a cost, but it still is one of the cheaper ones.
For boat building.
For boat building,
Yeah.
yeah, of course. A sheet at the moment is about $140
For one sheet.
for one sheet.
So it's
of,
pricey.
Half an inch. On the other side, if you think that the Home Depot crappy plywood costs $70 a sheet, yeah, I find that expensive.
For the quality difference.
For the quality difference, yeah. And another thing I might say about Okume, it's not the prettiest to the look. Many, they work with dyes, so they color it a little bit if you want to use it for finish, but I mostly use it where either it's going to be painted, fiberglassed over, or is not visible.
Making the jig had not gone as smoothly as planned. We made mistakes, we realized how bad our math skills are, and the end result was a sort of improvised jig which, although functional, wasn't quite as effortless as we had wanted. But in the end, everything worked out, and now we're one minute step closer towards a sailboat fit for the sea. Before we sign off from this video, I do want to say a really big thank you to a few people. First of all on the list is Charlene. So we publish real-time Patron updates every Tuesday on Patron, usually in video format while this whole refit is going on, although once we get back in the water it'll go back to a written format. Anyway, so in one of those Patron updates, I was filming Aladino in the interior, and we have this 24 to 70 millimeter lens, which isn't super duper wide, and so like I couldn't get the whole interior shot that I wanted. So I was just made a quick comment on there. I was like, well, I'm sorry you can't see the whole interior right now, but I can't back up anymore and our lens isn't wide enough. Charlene instantly jumped on that. She's like, oh, if you need a wider lens, let me get that for you. So she bought us a wider lens. It's what we're using to film right now, and it's made a huge difference because we can get this really beautiful wide angle view of the interior now, which I think really makes a difference and gives you a much better sense of space. So thank you, Charlene. Wow, I mean, what unusual circumstances. We do fully realize how lucky we are and how rare this is to have donors like this. I think it goes to show how powerful it is to share your story with other people. We feel really fortunate to be able to do that. So thank you guys.
Alright, so I think that's it for this week. Thank you so much for watching. We appreciate everyone who watches these videos and are so glad we got to share our story with you. If you enjoyed what we shared today, then please give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. If you disliked the video, then press the thumbs down button twice. And an extra big thanks to our patrons for really going the extra mile to make sure that these episodes keep happening, and an extra big thanks to these folks whose names are now magically appearing on screen for ensuring the continuation of Magic Carpet videos every Friday. We'll see you all next time.
Look at our wide lens. It gets wider as I walk back. Oh. Really cool.